You want to wrap your house? The first company representative I spoke to asked, his voice laced with skepticism. In chrome? That's right, I replied, trying to sound confident. The whole thing, walls, roof, everything. There was a long silence. Have you considered paint? He suggested helpfully. It started, innocently enough, with a can of paint. My garage door, a standard-issue faded white, had been bothering me for months. It was bland, boring, and utterly lacking in personality. So I decided to give it a little makeover. I chose a color called Midnight Blue, a deep, rich shade that I thought would add a touch of elegance and contrast to the otherwise beige exterior of my house. I spent a Saturday afternoon carefully painting the door, taking pride in the smooth, even strokes, the way the color transformed the entire look of the garage. It wasn't a radical change, just a subtle upgrade, a small act of personal expression. It wasn't a huge statement, just a splash of color in a sea of beige, a little bit of personality in a neighborhood that seemed determined to squash any hint of individuality. I thought it looked rather nice. Apparently, I was wrong, I thought, stepping back to admire my handiwork. The Midnight Blue was a welcome change, a refreshing departure from the monotonous uniformity of Sunridge Estates. Little did I know that Midnight Blue garage door would become the catalyst for an all-out war with the HOA. I should have known better. This was an HOA, after all. The inevitable confrontation arrived, as most confrontations in Sunridge Estates did, with a crisp, white envelope slipped under my front door. It was an HOA violation notice, informing me that my newly painted garage door was unacceptable and in violation of the community's aesthetic guidelines. The letter was signed by Susan Carmichael, President, Sunridge Estates Homeowners Association. Susan Carmichael. The name conjured images of perfectly coordinated throw pillows, meticulously organized spice racks, and a complete lack of humor. She was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity, the queen of beige, and, unfortunately for me, the president of the Sunridge Estates HOA. I'd seen her around, of course, a tightly wound woman with a permanent frown and a clipboard that seemed to be permanently attached to her hand. She was the kind of person who probably ironed her bed sheets and alphabetized her cereal boxes. A few days later, Susan herself appeared on my doorstep, ready to deliver her judgment in person. Mr. Davis, she began, her voice as sharp and cold as a winter wind, that garage door is simply unacceptable. It disrupts the visual unity of our community. It's too modern for our classic beige aesthetic. She said classic beige aesthetic, as if it were some kind of sacred, inviolable principle. It needs to be repainted, immediately. She thrust a small card at me. On it were 3, almost indistinguishable, swatches. The subsequent HOA meeting was a kangaroo court, a carefully orchestrated display of suburban tyranny. The community center's multi-purpose room, with its beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs, was filled with the usual suspects: the retirees, the busybodies, and the handful of Susan Carmichael's loyal followers, all eager to witness my public shaming. Susan, perched at the head table like a judge presiding over a trial, launched into a prepared speech about the importance of maintaining a cohesive visual aesthetic and the detrimental impact of my garishly colored garage door. She projected photos of my house onto a screen, highlighting the offending door as if it were evidence of a crime. "This midnight blue monstrosity," she declared, her voice dripping with disdain, "is a blatant violation of our community guidelines. It clashes with the surrounding homes. It lowers property values. It's unneighborly." She then presented the approved color palette for exterior paint, a list so restrictive, so utterly devoid of imagination, that it made my soul ache. The choices were off beige, slightly darker beige, the exact same beige but with a different name. It was a beige trifecta, a monument to blandness, a testament to the HOA's unwavering commitment to crushing any hint of individuality. There were other items on the agenda. Mr. Henderson was being grilled on the height of his hedges, apparently exceeding the limit by an inch. My internal reaction was a mixture of annoyance, frustration, and a growing sense of disbelief. Were these people serious? Was a slightly different shade of paint really such a threat to their carefully constructed world? I thought. I tried to defend myself, explaining that the color was subtle, that it complemented the house, that it was, in fact, quite tasteful. But my arguments were met with blank stares and dismissive comments. The HOA, it seemed, was not interested in reason or logic. They were interested in conformity, in control, and in enforcing their beige-tinted vision of suburban perfection. I refused point-blank to repaint. The HOA's response to my defiance was swift and predictable. I received another notice, this one informing me of escalating fines and threatening legal action. They would, they declared, take me to court, if necessary, to force me to repaint my garage door a more appropriate color. Gerald, looking smug, presented the notice personally. "If you want to live here, you must follow our rules." He near spat the words. I initially considered caving. Repainting the garage door would be a hassle, but it would be easier than fighting a legal battle. But as I looked at Gerald's smug, self-satisfied expression, something inside me snapped. "Oh, I'll follow your rules, all right," I thought. A plan, audacious and wonderfully insane, beginning to form in my mind. Straight into a black hole of bureaucracy. I needed a new strategy, something that would not only defy the HOA, but would also make a statement. A bold, unmistakable declaration of independence. If Susan and the HOA were so obsessed with aesthetics, with uniformity, with control, then I'd give them something they couldn't control. I'd give them the opposite of beige. I'd give them chrome. The idea came to me in a flash of inspiration, a vision of my house, transformed, gleaming, reflecting the sunlight like a giant suburban disco ball. I'd wrap the entire house in chrome vinyl. It was modern, certainly. It was technically an exterior modification, which, according to the bylaws, was allowed. With approval, of course, but I wouldn't be seeking that. And it was, without a doubt, the most gloriously inappropriate response to the HOA's demand for conformity that I could possibly imagine. "Susan Carmichael, you want a war on color? You've got one. Prepare to be blinded by the light," I declared internally, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to unleash the full force of my reflective, chrome-plated rebellion. My decision to chrome-wrap my entire house was not a spur-of-the-moment whim. It was the result of careful planning, meticulous research, and a deep-seated desire to inflict maximum aesthetic pain upon Susan Carmichael and the HOA. I started by researching car wrapping. I'd seen those flashy, chrome-wrapped sports cars on Instagram, and I figured if it was possible to wrap a Lamborghini, it must be possible to wrap a house. My initial searches were tentative, cautious, filled with questions about feasibility, cost, and of course, legality. My browser history went from midnight blue garage door paint to full house chrome wrap cost and is it legal to blind your neighbors with reflected sunlight? In record time, I chuckled, as I delved deeper into the world of vinyl wrapping. I discovered that, yes, it was possible to wrap an entire house in vinyl. It was unusual, certainly. It was expensive, definitely. But it was possible. I found a few examples online, mostly promotional stunts or art installations, but nothing quite on the scale of what I was envisioning. I learned about the different types of vinyl, the durability, the reflectivity, and the installation process. I learned that chrome vinyl was particularly challenging to work with, prone to showing imperfections and requiring expert application. But it was also the most visually striking, the most reflective, the most offensive to the beige-loving sensibilities of the HOA. And that, of course, was the entire point. Finding a company willing to take on this project was, unsurprisingly, a challenge. Most car wrapping businesses were accustomed to dealing with, well, cars. The idea of wrapping an entire house in chrome vinyl was met with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "You want to wrap your house?" the first company representative I spoke to asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "In chrome?" "That's right," I replied, trying to sound confident. "The whole thing. Walls, roof, everything." There was a long silence. "Have you considered paint?" he suggested helpfully. I eventually found a company, Wrap Kings, that specialized in large-scale custom wrapping projects. They'd done buses, trucks, even a small airplane, but never a house. The owner, a man named Tony with a shaved head and a surprisingly artistic sensibility, was intrigued. "A chrome house, huh?" he said, stroking his chin. "That's bold. I like it." I explained my situation. The HOA, the beige obsession, the burning desire for revenge. Tony listened patiently, a grin slowly spreading across his face. "So, you want to make a statement?" he asked. "I want to make a statement that can be seen from space," I replied. He laughed. "I think we can handle that." We spent the next hour discussing the details. The type of vinyl, the installation process, the timeline, and of course, the cost. It was going to be expensive, significantly more expensive than repainting my garage door. But it was worth it. It was an investment in my sanity, in my freedom, and in the glorious, unadulterated joy of driving Susan Carmichael completely insane. The day the Wrap Kings arrived was a day that would forever be etched in the memories of the residents of Sunridge Estates. It was like a scene from a science fiction movie, a fleet of trucks and vans emblazoned with the Wrap Kings logo descending upon my quiet suburban street. They unloaded rolls upon rolls of shimmering mirror-finish chrome vinyl, enough to cover a small stadium. They set up scaffolding, they deployed specialized tools, and they began the painstaking process of transforming my house from a beige box into a chrome monolith. The work was slow, meticulous, and utterly mesmerizing. The crew, a team of highly skilled professionals, moved with a practiced efficiency, carefully applying the vinyl to every surface, smoothing out wrinkles, and ensuring a perfect, seamless finish. The neighbors, of course, were captivated. They gathered on their lawns, watching the spectacle unfold, their expressions a mixture of confusion, amusement, and a growing sense of, "What on earth is going on over there?" Children pointed and giggled, dogs barked, and even the teenagers, normally glued to their phones, seemed impressed. Susan Carmichael, I noticed, was watching from her window, her face a mask of horror. She'd emerge from her house periodically, her arms crossed, her lips pursed, her eyes narrowed in a mixture of disbelief and rage. She'd make frantic phone calls, presumably to the HOA, to the city, to anyone who might be able to stop the chrome onslaught. I, meanwhile, maintained my usual facade of innocent unconcern. I'd wave cheerfully to the neighbors, offer them refreshments, and explain that I was simply making some exterior modifications to enhance the property's aesthetic appeal. I even, on one occasion, offered Susan a pair of sunglasses, suggesting that she might find them helpful in dealing with the increased reflectivity. She did not appreciate the gesture. After several days of intense, around-the-clock work, The transformation was complete. My house, once a perfectly ordinary beige-colored suburban dwelling, was now a gleaming, shimmering, blindingly reflective chrome monolith. The garage door, the original source of the conflict, was now indistinguishable from the rest of the house, a seamless expanse of mirror-like chrome. The walls, the roof, even the chimney were all covered in the same high-gloss material. I'd even, at Tony's suggestion, wrapped the mailbox, turning it into a miniature chrome sculpture. It looked like a spaceship had landed in the middle of Sunridge Estates. It was a mirror, a beacon, a giant middle finger to the HOA, all rolled into one, I thought, admiring my handiwork. The sun reflected off the chrome surface with an almost unbearable intensity, creating dazzling patterns of light and shadow. It was impossible to look at it directly without squinting, without feeling a sense of awe and perhaps a touch of fear. It was beautiful, it was ridiculous, it was perfect. And it was about to unleash a whole new level of HOA hell. I could hardly wait. The unveiling of the Chrome House, as it would soon be known, was a moment I'd been eagerly anticipating. I'd timed it perfectly, ensuring that Susan Carmichael would be taking her morning power walk past my house just as the final touches were being completed. And her reaction? It was exquisite. She stopped dead in her tracks, her perfectly coordinated pastel tracksuit suddenly seeming absurdly out of place against the backdrop of shimmering chrome. Her jaw dropped, her eyes widened, and her face went through a series of colors that I didn't even know were possible. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost, or perhaps a particularly offensive garden gnome. Then the screaming started. This is an outrage, she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that could shatter glass and probably set off car alarms. She stormed towards me, her fists clenched, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. You've turned your house into a reflective monstrosity. It's a hazard. I emerged from behind a particularly shiny section of wall, a picture of calm, unruffled composure. Good morning, Susan, I said, my voice dripping with feigned innocence. I see you've noticed my exterior modifications. What do you think? I was going for a minimalist, futuristic aesthetic. It's chrome, she roared, her face now a shade of purple that I'd previously only seen on overripe plums. It's blinding people. It's un-American. She seemed particularly offended by the un-American aspect, as if chrome were somehow a communist plot to undermine the fabric of suburban society. I believe it's called expressing myself, Susan, I corrected her gently. You should try it sometime. It's quite liberating. And, as I'm sure you're aware, exterior modifications are perfectly within the HOA guidelines, as long as they don't violate any specific rules, of course, which, I assure you, this doesn't. I gestured towards the gleaming expanse of chrome, a picture of serene satisfaction. Watching Susan's face contort with rage and disbelief was more satisfying than any shade of beige could ever be, I thought, struggling to suppress a laugh. She sputtered, she fumed, she threatened, but it was all for naught. The Chrome House was here to stay, and Susan Carmichael was powerless to stop it. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, a victory for individuality, a crushing defeat for the forces of beige conformity. Susan, predictably, did not take her defeat lying down. She immediately called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding immediate action to address the chrome crisis. She envisioned a swift condemnation of my monstrosity, a unanimous vote to force its removal, a restoration of order and beige to Sunridge Estates. But she was in for a rude awakening. The meeting, held in the usual beige-walled community center, was a scene of utter chaos. Susan, looking increasingly disheveled and frantic, ranted and raved about the dangers of reflective surfaces, the aesthetic blight on the neighborhood, and the urgent need to take action. But the other HOA members, for once, were not swayed. They'd seen the Chrome House. They'd seen the crowds of people admiring it. They'd even perhaps secretly enjoyed the spectacle of Susan's meltdown. Their legal counsel, the long-suffering Mr. Henderson, was forced to explain, yet again, that there was nothing they could do. The Chrome House, he pointed out, violated no existing HOA rules. It was on private property. It was technically an exterior modification, which was allowed. And, most importantly, any attempt to force its removal would likely result in a costly and embarrassing lawsuit. But, it's Chrome! Susan sputtered, her voice cracking with desperation. It's reflective. Yes, Mr. Henderson replied with a sigh. It is. And as far as I can tell, there's no law against that. The meeting ended in disarray, with Susan's demands ignored, her authority shattered, and her vision of a beige utopia crumbling around her. Undeterred, Susan escalated her campaign of vengeance. She called the city, hoping to find some obscure building code, some zoning regulation, some technicality that would allow her to force the removal of my reflective monstrosity. She complained about excessive glare, claiming that the Chrome House was a public safety hazard, blinding drivers and causing accidents. She argued that it was a nuisance, disrupting the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood. She even, I later learned, tried to claim that it was attracting undesirable elements, presumably anyone who didn't appreciate the beauty of beige. The city, however, was not impressed. A city inspector, a bored-looking man named Bob — apparently all city inspectors are named Bob — arrived, took one look at the Chrome House, and declared it perfectly safe and compliant with all applicable regulations. And then, the unexpected happened. A famous influencer, a woman known for her love of all things quirky and unconventional, stumbled upon the Chrome House while driving through Sunridge Estates. She was captivated. She parked her car, took a series of photos and videos, and posted them on her social media accounts, praising the house's futuristic design, its bold statement, and its unique artistic vision. The post went viral. Within hours, the Chrome House was a social media sensation, attracting thousands of likes, comments, and shares. People were calling it amazing, iconic, and the ultimate HOA revenge. The influencer's followers, a global audience of millions, were clamoring to know more about the Chrome House and the story behind it. The viral post triggered a media frenzy. Local news outlets picked up the story, then national news outlets, then international. The Chrome House was featured in newspapers, on television news programs, and in countless online articles. The headlines were a mix of amusement and admiration. Suburban homeowner wraps house in Chrome to spite HOA. The Chrome Castle, a monument to petty revenge. Is this the most outrageous house in America? I was interviewed by reporters, bloggers, and even a few television producers. I became, for a brief, shining moment, a national celebrity, the Chrome Crusader, the reflective rebel, the guy who'd taken on the HOA and won. The interviews were, frankly, hilarious. I'd stand in front of my gleaming Chrome House, wearing sunglasses, partly for effect, partly because it was actually quite bright, and explain my motivations, my inspiration, and my utter lack of regret. It all started with a garage door, I'd say, with a straight face. And then, things escalated. The reporters would chuckle, the cameras would roll, and the legend of the Chrome House would grow. Meanwhile, Susan Carmichael, I imagined, was somewhere in her beige-on-beige living room, pulling out her perfectly coiffed hair and screaming at the television. The contrast between the online praise for my architectural masterpiece and Susan's continued, increasingly desperate outrage was a source of endless amusement. It was the ultimate vindication, a public spectacle of revenge, and a testament to the power of the internet to turn even the most mundane suburban dispute into a global phenomenon. The aftermath of the Crome House's viral fame was, for Susan Carmichael, a complete and utter catastrophe. Her reputation, once, in her mind at least, pristine and unblemished, was in tatters. She'd become a national laughingstock, the poster child for HOA tyranny, the subject of countless memes and online jokes. She resigned from the HOA in disgrace, her final act a pathetic attempt to save face. She deleted all her social media accounts, unable to withstand the barrage of online mockery. And then, she did what any defeated suburban dictator would do. She put her house up for sale. But even that proved to be a challenge. Potential buyers, upon learning that they'd be living across the street from the infamous Crome House, would politely decline, or, in some cases, burst out laughing. Susan Carmichael, the queen of beige, the champion of conformity, had become a victim of her own rigid worldview. Her house, once her pride and joy, was now a symbol of her defeat, a constant reminder of her failed attempt to control her neighbors. My Crome House, meanwhile, was thriving. It became a genuine tourist attraction, drawing visitors from far and wide. People would drive by slowly, taking pictures, posing for selfies, and generally marveling at the sheer audacity of it all. The local tourism board even added it to their list of must-see attractions, alongside the town's historic courthouse and the surprisingly popular World's Largest Ball of Twine Museum. Then came the corporate sponsorships. A major tech company, known for its innovative and slightly unconventional approach to marketing, contacted me, offering a substantial sum of money to partner with me on promoting their new line of smart home products. They wanted to use the Crome House as a backdrop for their advertising campaign, a symbol of futuristic living and cutting-edge technology. And, in the most unexpected twist of all, a local art museum declared the Crome House an experimental masterpiece, a bold statement on suburban conformity, and a provocative exploration of the intersection of art and architecture. They even offered to host a temporary exhibit featuring photos and videos of the house, alongside my original napkin-based sketches of the design. It was all utterly absurd, of course, but I embraced it. I'd become accidentally a cultural icon, a champion of artistic expression, and a walking, talking advertisement for the power of petty revenge. Eventually, Susan's house was sold. And the new neighbors? They were everything Susan wasn't. They were a young couple, artists, who were thrilled to be living across the street from the famous Crome House. They embraced the neighborhood's newfound notoriety. They loved the attention, and they even, to my delight, added their own touch of unconventional flair to their property. A giant, brightly colored mural painted on their garage door, depicting a flock of flamingos escaping from a beige prison. One afternoon, as I was polishing the chrome mailbox, a task that had become a surprisingly therapeutic ritual, the new neighbor, a woman named Sarah, walked over. "So," she said with a grin, "what's the story behind the Crome House? I've heard so many versions." I smiled. "It's a long story," I said, "but the short version is, I had a disagreement with the previous owner of your house about a garage door." She laughed. "Well," she said, "I think it's amazing. It's inspiring. It makes me want to paint my whole house purple." "Do it," I said. "I'll even help." The Sunridge HOA still existed, technically, but its power had been effectively neutered. I still received the occasional vaguely worded notice about some minor infraction, but now they were more like suggestions. And so I remained, the unlikely ruler of my Chrome kingdom, the accidental champion of suburban rebellion. My house, once a source of contention, was now a symbol of victory, a testament to the power of creativity, and a constant reminder of the sweet taste of revenge. It was a sunny afternoon. I was sitting on my porch, wearing a pair of aviator sunglasses, a necessary accessory when living in a Chrome house, admiring the blinding reflection of the sun off my walls. It was a beautiful sight, a dazzling display of light and color, a constant reminder of my triumph over beige tyranny. Who knew that a garage door color and a burning desire for revenge could lead to all this? I guess sometimes you just gotta wrap your house in Chrome to find your peace, I thought, smiling to myself. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, genuinely happy. I raised my glass of iced tea in a silent toast. To the Chrome Castle of Sunridge Estates, may it forever shine as a beacon of hope for all those oppressed by HOA beige.